Welcome to the place where you'll hear from HR leaders, people experts, and wellbeing professionals. You'll learn about their personal and professional journeys, hear about the future of HR and wellbeing, and take away actionable insights and tips. This is the HR and Wellbeing Insider Podcast. Hi, Rob. Thanks for coming onto the HR and Wellbeing Insider Podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me, Paul.
Nice to have you here, which is great. And to jump straight into the juicy bits, to the detail. Just for our audience, you've spent time as a health and lifestyle coach. You now work in corporate health and wellbeing for a large construction firm. How did you get to where you are today, and what led you down this path?
Right. It's I suppose where it began is I graduated, believe it or not, in 2000. So 25 years ago, graduated. I was always into sport, always into exercise. I did an exercise physiology degree, and sort of came out the other side. I wasn't quite sure where I was going, what I was going to do. I've always had a penchant for coaching, really loved that. So I sort of went into coaching, and then ended up doing sort of further qualifications, diplomas and stuff, and ended up sort of doing the training and coaching, and ended up getting into physical therapy. As a result from that. And that's sort of where it all started. And that's how I kind of got into the OH world. I was working in a sort of with a lot of private clients, a lot of clients one-on-one was where I was at and happy. And then an opportunity just came up. One of my friends said, "Do you know what, this job came up close to where I was. Do you want to have a look at it?" And I sort of said, "Well, not really." I said, "I've got a job. I'm quite happy with what I'm doing." And so it was one of those things. It just went along the interview, had a good time, and thought, actually, do you know what, this would be really interesting. And that's where I sort of started a transition away from one-on-one coaching into sort of more of a corporate world. And and it sort of snowballed from there.
That's really interesting. And that one-on-one work is going to be different, one would assume, to working at a group level within a private employer. What are the similarities, would you say, across working one-on-one in that space, moving to that sort of group-led role, do you think?
Yeah, I think probably, Paul, it's less around similarities and more about the skills and transferable knowledge that you can take. Because I think I loved working one-on-one. I still do. I've got a couple of clients that I've kept, through the years, and I love working one-on-one because you get that high degree of engagement. You get the opportunity to interact on a very personal level, and you get a huge amount of change is possible with that individual because of the amount of time you get with them, the detail you can go into. And I always thought that was what I wanted to do, always one-on-one, because that's where I can create the most influence. And then I sort of started working with smaller sort of teams, whether it's sports teams or very small corporate teams. I thought, in fact, there's an opportunity to influence wider here. And I think it's sort of lit a spark inside me, I suppose, to think, well, actual fact, how big could you take this? Is there the option to really influence people on a larger scale using the same kind of key skills and values that you took? And I think, I do miss the one-on-one, definitely, but creating that wider change and is really, really interesting. And I think the skills that are transferable, the things you take from that one environment is, I believe, is that coaching element. The coaching element is key, because yes, you can't do it on a one-on-one basis in a corporate world, but you're looking to empower other people to take on that mantle for you, and how you actually get other people interested in the same way that you are, and how you can kind of lead them. And I think that's in many ways a bigger challenge, because you've got to try and get lots of people thinking, not like me necessarily, but thinking, along the same sort of lines, and then being able to deliver it in their own way out to a business. Where I love that challenge. Love it.
Yeah, big challenge, super big challenge. That is getting people on the same journey or similar journey, thinking in a similar way, which is really important. In the health and lifestyle space, we see a lot now around prevention and prevention over cure, which I think, it's been around for years and years, right? But prevention and preventative health is getting big. From your experience, what are the key lifestyle factors that have the biggest impact on someone's energy and performance at work?
I'm going to go with probably my cornerstone for everything. Sleep is going to be my number one answer for that. Sleep is so important. It does literally underpin everything else. And I think whether you're talking about the quality of it, the duration of it, it just underpins everything. So, and I think what's really interesting in that world over the years of coaches is sleep is one of the things that people get very quickly used to, a perception of normality. that's how they feel. This is how I feel. I'm always a bit tired. I'm always a bit drained, or I always feel like I want to nap at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's only when you sort of challenge that and actually change things and start to look at something, actually, what if we did get half an hour extra a night? What if we did get an hour extra a night? What did we do? And all of a sudden, it's those changes that you suddenly go, hang on a minute, that's changed quite a lot. I feel very different now. I feel very different. And I think sleep for me is it's the one that people are more willing to accept than anything else in my experience. Just like, oh, I'm not a good sleeper, or I get to bed late. I do that, And you're not talking about the situations where people have got young families or new families, because those challenges are always going to be there. But, people sort of just sort of default to this point where I never really sleep well. I always get to bed late. I'm always up early, and that's but changing it. What I've seen over the years, it can be huge, absolutely huge. Into how it relates to energy levels, how it relates to the way that people perform physically, mentally, everything. So I think if you were holding me to one answer, it's going to be sleep. I think is the biggest
That's
one.
Really interesting. Yeah, I like that. Really, really interesting. Sleep. So for me, for example, I don't really think about my sleep that much. I go to bed at night. I get up in the morning. Sometimes I sleep okay. Sometimes I wake up and I feel like I've had a great sleep. But actually, I've never thought about the impact sleep has on my physical and mental well-being. But it makes sense, because I can get to an afternoon sometimes at 3 o'clock and think, God, I'm so tired. And then for the next 2 hours, I'm just not motivated. I'm not on the ball at all at work. So if we think about that from a work perspective, what would someone like you do, for example, or what can a company do in that perspective when it comes to sleep? Because a lot of people will say, well, sleep, I'm at home, it's nighttime, I'm not at work. Work can't help me with sleep. What do you think of that challenge?
I think that I think we can do stuff. We absolutely can, but I think it falls into that awareness and education bracket. It's trying to educate people and actually make them aware of the impact of sleep. Are you aware of, the impact? Because a lot in a corporate world, it very often comes down to shift workers. You talk a lot about shift workers and how that impacts on fatigue, how it impacts on alertness, that type of thing. But, sleep for, your 9 to 5 workers is exactly the same in many ways. I'm not saying it's the same as a night work. And of course, the impacts can be very similar. I think it's our job to educate, to make people aware, and to, try and trigger that kind of curiosity mindset to think, actually, what if I did change something? What if I did? And I think for us as well as an organization, if we take it the next level down, it's around working hours, looking at fatigue and looking and saying, well, actually, if we're not getting someone home from a site, if they're finishing at 6 o'clock and they've got a 2-hour commute, they're not going home too late, they're not going to want to go to bed an hour later. So it's mapping it all into that holistic health piece to say, actually, we can have an impact in that way. So it's looking outside the box a little bit and understanding there's little bits of or little remits that we can change, every little thing to make a big impact.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Education and awareness is absolutely key. And that leads me on to sort of the topic of, in a workforce like where you work, you've got a very complex, diverse workforce. And when we think about education, awareness, health and wellbeing, occupational health benefits, there's a lot there. And when people come to work, sometimes it can be overwhelming. So from a business perspective, how do you tailor that education, awareness, staff health and wellbeing benefits to such a complex and diverse workforce?
Oh, it's a great question. Great question. And it probably ties back into where we first started talking, when I said about working one-on-one was where I believed you could always have the greatest influence, because I always felt you would always have to dilute everything so much going into a large corporate that you wouldn't be able to have the same impact. But I think what I've seen in reality is very different. But I mean, no one size fits all. In our organization, you're not going to be able to create 14,000 bespoke wellbeing plans for every individual. However, as you said, that should kind of be the goal, really. We want, people to be able to interact and to be able to have their line managers, supervisors, having that level of interaction where you kind of can create that a little bit. And I think for me, from a central perspective, so we work in a sort of central function, feeding out to the business, it's about putting the right sort of guide ropes and framework in place for people to be able to ask the right questions, to have the tools to be able to support someone in their wellbeing journey, all those kind of things, but allowing people at the same time to, I go back to that, the word I used before, that sort of curiosity, and start to look into it. What does it mean? What does it mean for us as a project or a site or whatever it might be, function? What does it mean to us? Because it's going to be different. It's going to be different for every single part of the business. And you kind of got to give that enough tools, but also the authorization, really, the authority to go and explore this topic and find out what it means to your area of the business. And I think, in that, one of the key aspects there is listen to your people. Ask them what they want, what they need. Now, sometimes what they come up with might be far away from your thoughts and what you think is needed, but it's a case of just marrying up what they want and probably what you think they need and bringing those two together to kind of say, well, actually now we have something that is ticking a lot of boxes here, and meeting a lot of needs. So I think if we bring those together, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and I can see that. I think, like you said, in a large organisation, you're having to put the guidance, the education and awareness from a central function out to managers, leaders, trainers, etc., within the business. And you made a good point there around, you can't create a personalised wellbeing plan for every single employee. So this is where we think then maybe about engagement. So if you've got such a large workforce, what sort of data would you use to track that type of engagement? Because you've got lots of data points around absence and things like that within the business, but also that ad hoc feedback, because you might have had such a fantastic positive outcome on an individual employee, but how do you bring that together into that engagement for the wider business to say this is the impact we're actually having?
Yeah, and absolutely an ongoing challenge is the answer. It's an ongoing challenge, and I think anyone that works in the wellbeing space knows this. The sort of data that we use and what we're trying to get out of stuff is not as straightforward, as other areas that we work in. But I think you basically it's having solutions for each point. So, for example, we have a really good reporting culture in our business, and that includes positive reporting, observations, positive interventions, that sort of thing. So we have a huge drive on people raising those things when we do see it, when people experience it, right through to the sort of more, I would say KPI led, but kind of the KPI led strategies that we have and stuff like that, where we'll ask people to return on a larger scale and say, well, look, have you completed your wellbeing matrix return for this month for your site or your thing, and we'll track it in that way. So I think it's horses for courses, isn't it? Having the little interventions, and getting people to want to report it, and also making sure that we have a sort of, you said we did culture. So that if there are things that are reported, we've heard you and this is what we've done about it, and actually, sing about that and say, we heard you and this is what we've done, or if it's the case of positive feedback, we've noticed this and we'll positively feedback. We just had a set of awards in our business called Behaviour Champions, and it's about people who have gone, not always the extra mile, but have always embodied, the values and behaviours of the organisation, which is helpful. So I think there's a raft of data that we do use, and I won't bore the listeners by going into that, but there is that, but we're always looking for more, more meaningful stuff that we can really dial into and tell us that we're doing the right things. Because I always say, I can sit from a central perspective and we can sit around our SLT table and talk about great things. But if I go out into sites and it's not there, we're not seeing, people are not saying the same things, there's a discord and we need to address it. Because unless it's working with the boots on the ground, it's not working.
Yeah, I totally agree, actually. And I love that like you said, lots of different data points, but also the behaviors. And I think the behaviors is really important, actually, because like you say, from a central perspective, an SLT perspective, senior level perspective, it's great if the data looks good, but if it's not having the impact on site and on the front line, then actually something's going wrong. So I really love that point. And I would imagine you'll link with different providers that you use to get their data. I mean, is there any sort of key data that you would always go back to sort of give you that lead or those levers to have those conversations?
We do have, so we have a health and wellbeing dashboard that we present, and that will look at our health risk management approach. So we'll look at things like in an occupational health world around health surveillance, that type of stuff. But it will also look at things like voluntary attrition, people leaving the company by their choice, that sort of rate we track. Sometimes it's obviously in there. It's a bit of a rudimental one, but it does give you a flavour of keeping people in work and well. We have our surveys that we do, I would say regularly, but we have a large pulse survey in the organisation, and we have some local, more wellbeing led initiatives. And I think we have a lot of touch points out on site. We'll have sort of corporate campaigns that will be more sort of like your traditional safety stand down type of stuff, but those are more and more about well-being and about the holistic health side of things, and all that is tracked and fed back into that sort of, you said we did model, so it all comes back into myself and the team, and we look and say, okay, let's look at this. So it is having those, I think the personal, if one person, two people are reporting a similar sort of thing, it's wider spread than that. You don't have to think, oh, that's probably just one person saying that. It's going to be something that's more widely spread felt. So there's merit in actually chasing that and trying to change it.
Yeah, I love it. And that you said we did, I think, is really good, because that is really showing that communication piece, which, having spoken to several people on the podcast, it's a key part of this, because you've got to communicate and show people and be transparent in terms of, this is what we're hearing, this is what we're doing. So I love that you said we did. And actually, one of the things that I talked about earlier or mentioned briefly was prevention. And it'd be good, construction, it's high pressure, it's high risk. What role does preventative health have in terms of keeping people safe, well, engaged? Because prevention's it's a big word and it's talked about a lot, but what role does that have in terms of your sort of structure and sector?
I think probably similar to a lot of sector sport. It's huge. It is huge. And I think it's fair to say that probably over the last, let's say 10 years of construction, it was broadly a reactive model. It was a reactive model. It was EAP focused, and it was support focused. And I think, and that was needed, I think, because probably construction was a little bit behind other sectors in many ways over the years. So you have to be sort of honest and transparent about that, and say, well, actually, what we need to do is support people. To start with, let's get that sort of model. But I think in the last, especially I would say 5 to 6 years, the proactive side of things has rocketed in construction. And I think it's the understanding of the role it plays. We spoke earlier about sleep, and if you look at safety statistics have always been a key metric in obviously construction. And when you start to get the mindset change to understand the impact that fatigue has, the cognitive function has, the physical limitations have on those kind of key statistics, it starts to, many years ago, starts to ring a bell, and people think, actually, there is a real benefit to this, and I think you look at those, probably those little things as springboards, or sometimes a little nugget where someone's gone, actually, we will start looking at this a little bit more. But I think that, when you get someone on site, if we look at our industry, they're getting into, huge vehicles, trains, dangerous operations, so putting people in those situations, we have to know that in actual fact, they're in a good place. They're physically and mentally in a reasonable place to be able to undertake that task. And I think what you see now in construction a little bit more, and probably only over the last few years, is construction is changing a little bit. It's a slow burn, of course it is, but you are getting a lot more people now where you're going out and engaging with them, and they're a lot more switched on about their own personal health, and a lot more engaged in it, and of course that's not across the board, but you're seeing a lot more of it now, which is really interesting. So there's more of a open audience when you're talking about things like health, nutrition, all that side of things. And going back, it's about those tools, isn't it? Can we educate people on what good nutrition looks like, what good sleep looks like, what good exercise, what stress management, all those things, what good looks like. And then you're just offering the tools for people to be able to pick up and utilize. But I think as well, what we have to focus on now, we've done recently, is managing the things that we can manage as an organization, and understanding that well-being and workplace well-being is something that we physically can manage. And I think a lot of people sort of have spent many years thinking, well, we can only support with these things. We can't really control the divorce or the separation or the whatever bereavement, whatever it might be. And absolutely, no, you can't control that. But you can sure as hell support them when they come into a workplace that in actual fact has a great management strategy for psychosocial risks. We're managing those. We're creating the right environments through our values and behaviours, and trying to promote psychological safety and do all the things that matter for that. So it's understanding all three of those things mixed together nicely to create a workplace wellbeing model. That's what it's about, rather than just thinking, oh, well, things happen and we'll try and do what we can. Actually, there's a lot we can do in the workplace as well, to make it a more rounded approach.
That is such a fantastic response, actually. And that's really, really good, because how many companies I think that I've known in the past that would rely on, well, we've got an EAP, they can call the EAP, or if someone goes off sick or they're not very well in the office, call the EAP. And it's so reactive. And I would agree with you in that. I think particularly since COVID, that dreaded word, people are so much more switched on with their personal health and well-being and tracking their own KPIs in terms of their health. So I think that's a massive opportunity for businesses to link the two together. From your sort of coaching background and current role, do you see any future opportunities that you can see and think, actually, for workplace wellbeing, these opportunities in preventative health are really going to change the game? Or do you think we're very slowly moving there? Or is there something you're looking at and going, that is a big opportunity for this space?
So I think if I was speaking from a construction perspective and stuff like that, I think there's lots of things on the horizon. I think it ties into one of my, not bugbears, I don't like to have bugbears, but one of my points is around delivering on this stuff. It's very easy as organizations that to play the magpie, isn't it? Look over there, the new shiny tool, the AI, we'll go and have a look at that. But in actual fact, one of the key sort of fundamentals is you can spend years doing that and never really getting anywhere. Because you're always looking for the next thing, looking for the next best thing. And I think, to use a sort of military term, the kind of prioritize and execute model, actually choose the things that you're going to deliver and actually deliver them in your business, your project, and actually come to the end of the year and say, we've delivered this, we've actually made a real difference. And I think it's getting people into that mindset to understand that, when you're sitting in that strategic meeting or something, it might not be the sexiest thing that you're presenting at the beginning that is going to grab the headlines, but they're sure as hell going to be happy when you deliver it at the end of the year and go, do you know what, we saw both those two or three things over the line and they're now embedded in BAU and we're going to move on to the next thing. And I think that kind of is a roundabout way of answering that, because I think there are lots of things in the pipeline. I'm involved in some projects around AI, predictive health, outcomes and stuff like that, which is all great and it's fantastic. But we need to be realistic about where we are right now and embedding the things that we're trying to do right now and get them over the line and get them into BAU. Really, I would love to be in a place where we don't talk about best practice in health and wellbeing. We just talk about practice. It is what we do. It's how we deliver stuff. And then, we've always got one eye on the cool stuff. Absolutely. I'm sure in the years to come, in months to come, it'll change and we'll have more tools at our disposal. But I think, I personally would rather see people prioritize and get things over the line in the short term.
I love that answer, because one of the things that I hear day in, day out from HR leaders, heads of occupational health and wellbeing, etc., is there's so many different things in the market and you're constantly getting bombarded with, here's a new tool, we can help you with XYZ in your workforce. And one of the key things is, how do people work out what they need and when? So someone like you in your role, do you need a new tool? Do you need this predictive analytics over here, or, whatever it might be? So I think that point from you there around picking a couple of objectives and really doubling down on those and delivering is really important. How would you, what advice would you give to someone in your position that actually is in a role and they are getting a bit, maybe blindsided isn't the right phrase, but they're getting hammered all the time by new products, new tools, buy this, buy this, buy this. How do they actually prioritize and deliver? How do they, without just cutting everybody off, because they don't want to miss something that's new, those new opportunities? What would your advice be to those people?
Oh, it's a great question. I think having a clear idea of what your strategy is helps. If you've got a clear strategy and you've got clear, perhaps 2, 3, 4 swim lanes, that at any point you can pick up new parts as you go. But if you, to use the Dave Brailsford analogy, wasn't it, about making the bike go faster? If it's not making the bike go faster, what are you doing with it? Why are you doing it? So if you have a clear vision and a clear idea of what your 3 pillars are, key priorities, whatever it might be from a strategy perspective, you can almost cut out the noise a little bit and just go, because I'll be no different to any other people you've had on this podcast. Your LinkedIn is completely exploded with people offering you all sorts of things. And it's so easy to get distracted, but you just think, actually, what do I need right now? Does this help me deliver my key priority for this year? If it doesn't, I'm going to put a pin in it, park it for a second, and I will come back to it, but at the right time and the right point. And I think sometimes, you joke there, Paul, about shutting yourself off from everyone, but I think sometimes that helps, just to kind of go back, almost metaphorically close the doors around you and just go, right, what does this need to look like? What do I need to focus on? And cut the noise out and say, right, okay, these are the key things and key people I need on board to make this happen. Let's do that. And then sort of open the doors up again, and you can, keep everyone happy and keep them at bay. But it's so easy to get distracted, and it's not easy. It's not easy at all, because we know, health wellbeing professionals are no different. You see something shiny there, you go, oh, that sounds really cool. And I know for a fact that my board would love that if I start going into that. But it's being kind of true to yourself and going, no, I know what we're doing and I know what the end point is. So whether it's a 2, 3, 4, 5 year strategy, I know what the end point is. I know what we're doing right now is going to get us to where we need to be.
I think I'll take some of that advice, because I am one of those people who not only reaches out a lot, I get it all the time, sales tools, partnerships tools, and I'm like, oh, I like that. And then before I know it, I'm in a 2-hour rabbit hole of all these different tabs and tools. And then I get to the end of it and go, actually, I don't need them right now. But then I've just wasted 2 hours. So really good advice.
Yeah.
And one of the things you mentioned there was having a clear strategy and knowing what you're delivering. But actually, when it comes to workplace wellbeing, what do you think businesses are getting wrong when it comes to workplace wellbeing, and how should they go about changing that and rethinking that? Because it's a tough space for people like you in this role to get things, right. But what do you think businesses that you've seen maybe externally through your network, what do you think businesses are getting wrong when it comes to wellbeing?
You're leading me down a path there, Paul. I'm not going to take the bait and say this is what everyone gets wrong. But I think one of the things that people can focus on to get right, and it does go back to that strategy, understanding where you're going and how you're going to get there. And I think having the confidence to be really transparent about what might happen and the outputs from what you're trying to deliver, because they're not always positive. If I go back to a previous life many, many moons ago, and we had a sickness absence project, and we were talking about reporting, and we were talking about trying to drive down sickness absence, and it tied in with the sort of wellbeing work that was coming in. And when I presented, the first thing I said is the likelihood is the increase in absence will be XYZ% over the next month, year. And of course, everyone went, the whole project is to drive it down, not push it up. And I said, but it's going to be a reality, because we're asking people to report more. We're going to tighten up the reporting framework. We're going to do this. I said, so absolutely, for the next year and a half, you're going to have higher figures than you've ever had before. But that was part of the strategy. It was communicating and knowing that was going to be part of the. So you've got to understand that, because I think people are very clear. They want instant results. We want it all quickly now. What can we do? And on to the next thing. But having that sort of clear picture of strategy and understanding how all the parts are going to play together, what it's going to mean for the business, the impact it's going to have, allows you to kind of stay aligned. And I think a lot of, companies still focus on initiative-based work. There's a lot of initiatives, great initiatives it might be, and they motivate and they engage brilliantly for, whether it's the time of the initiative itself, or whether it's a couple of months afterwards, if it was a powerful speaker or something like that. And all those tools are fantastic and brilliant. But where do they fit into the strategy? Are they fitting into the strategy, and are they, being utilized in the right way? And because again, we all know the impact of a great speaker and a personal story is wonderful. Does it tie in? Does it tie into something? I think a lot of companies are still, because of the short-term impact of those speakers or that initiative or whatever it might be, a lot of companies still go to that constantly, and it's a constant. But in actual fact, is it actually changing the face of the business? Is it actually changing the way that you operate, or the guidelines that you have in place? I'm not going to say it's not, but they definitely have a place, and it definitely can be powerful tools. But it shouldn't be the end and start point.
Yeah, and again, I think that transparency and that communication is key, because actually sometimes, like you say, great example there as well around the sickness absence. It might be that doing things in that certain way gives the opposite effect to start with before you start seeing that success. And I think the world we live in, right? Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, we want everything right now. Chat GPT, everything's instant. And I think that makes me think that these things can't always be instant. And workplace health and wellbeing is not a quick instant. We're putting a speaker on and tomorrow everyone's going to feel great, because that's not how it works. So I think
No.
that realism is important.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a key point there around the sort of communication side of things. That is absolutely key. Communicate well and communicate clearly from the start. And it doesn't matter. We could be talking about anything here, couldn't we? But it's so important from a health and wellbeing perspective. And people aren't daft in the corporate world. If you're selling a wonderful wellbeing strategy or initiatives, all this sort of stuff, but they're looking around them and their basic working conditions or their welfare is not up to scratch, you've lost them. You've lost them at the first moment, because they're going to say, well, I don't believe in this at all. This is, and so people do want those fundamental things looked after on their wellbeing journey. I think is another true fact. People aren't silly.
Yeah, another really great point. And how many of us have seen, and I can say I've seen it, where, you get a company say, here's a great mental health and wellbeing strategy, and you've got all of these great benefits, but actually their people are under pressure to work 12-hour days and they're always on and they can't take time off. Like you say, you lose people at the first hurdle.
Falls apart. Yeah.
Really good point. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think really, really good points. To finish off, it'd be great to get your advice and guidance for people. So, health and safety, wellbeing leaders that are out there in workplace wellbeing right now, they've listened to the podcast, they're really motivated, they want to go and make a real difference in their workplace. What do you think are, a couple of things that they can just go off and do? What would your advice be to get them on track and to help them go and make a difference in their workplace in that role?
Understand your people. Understand your people is fundamental, and of course, that will transcend just the health and wellbeing space. But understanding your people and understanding what they want, and get buy-in at the highest level that you possibly can. For one, but it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a pincer movement. It's getting a groundswell of enthusiasm and drive and passion there, and coming at it from that way, but also coming at it from the top as well. You get the authority to go and make these changes and go and look at these things, and really kind of don't be too rigid as well. Don't be too rigid in your approach, because I've flexed beyond belief over the years. I've walked into workplaces and I've gone, I know exactly what this needs to look like. And 2 months later, I'm ripping up a bit of paper and going, you don't know a thing. You haven't got a clue, have you? Because it's nothing like that, because that's not what is required here. So I think you've got to have that sort of flexibility. And I think that I do like as well in this space, people that are relaxed and calm about it. And just kind of take your time, understand the people, understand who your stakeholders are, how you need to engage with them, and be willing to flex your narrative all the time. There is not one narrative that will suit everyone in the business. You've got to, it might be the same end result you're trying to get to, but flex the narrative to meet the demands of everyone, and be willing to kind of not compromise, but understand that when you're talking at, at higher levels, you're going to have to, perhaps dumb down your kind of approach a little bit, in the sense of talking about the numbers and what it means and why we're doing it on a corporate level and how that helps us win work and look good from the outside, things like that, because that's the reality of business, and then when you're talking, at other levels, you're talking on a more personal level about, being the right thing to do and how, the difference it's going to make and impact. So it's just being able to talk across those multiple levels, but still trying to deliver the same point, I think is really, really important skill. And I think you've always got to look outside. You always got to look outside of what's going on, what the industry is doing, what other people are doing, but be critical and look and say, well, actually, that's not right for my business at the minute. That's a really good thing for the, lawyers, or it's a really good thing for the financial sector. But you know what? That's not right for construction, or it's not right for housing, whatever it might be, because that's not the place we're in. The place we're in is this, and I'm going to ignore that. And I'm going to focus on what in actual fact is going to make a difference to our business.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I really like that, understanding your people on two different aspects. So understanding your people from a health and wellbeing and needs perspective, but also in terms of how you're communicating your plan and strategy at those different levels, because it's relevant to everybody, but in a different way. Great advice there. Really great advice there, Rob. It's been really great to talk to you, how you started your health and lifestyle coaching, talking about sleep to prevention to challenges and opportunities. A few tricky questions in there, but really good to share. And I will be making sure to link your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, etc. But it's been great having you on. Really appreciate your time.
No, No, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed that. And it's nice to chat. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on the podcast, Rob. I appreciate it.
Welcome. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the HR and Wellbeing Insider podcast. Look out for the next episode. And in the meantime, sign up to our newsletter in the comments below to hear more from our guests and news and tips on HR and wellbeing. See you in the next episode.